The ship descended through clouds that glowed like liquid silver, and Commander Marcus Chum pressed his face against the viewport like a child seeing snow for the first time. He had traveled across 3 star systems to reach this place, and now the crystalline world of Velara spread beneath him like a dream made solid. Towers of living crystal rose from the surface and caught the light of twin suns and scattered it into rainbows that danced across the landscape. This was the heart of the Veltharian Queendom, and Marcus carried the hopes of all humanity in his briefcase. Earth needed allies, and the Veltharians ruled 40 star systems with technology that made human ships look like wooden rafts floating beside aircraft carriers. The swarm was coming, and everyone knew it. Those insectoid horrors had already consumed 12 colonies on the outer rim, and Earth's fleet could not hold them back alone. Marcus adjusted his formal uniform and checked his translation device one final time before the ship touched down on a landing pad made of something that looked like frozen starlight. The air smelled sweet when he stepped outside, and he noticed immediately that everything here seemed to sing with a faint harmonic tone. Guards awaited him at the base of the ramp, and they stood 7 feet tall with skin that glowed soft blue and eyes like pools of liquid mercury. They carried weapons that looked like crystalline branches grown into the shape of blades, and Marcus felt very small and very human standing before them. "Welcome to Velara, human envoy," one of them said in a voice that resonated like wind chimes. "The Queen Mother awaits your presence." They led him through corridors that seemed alive, and walls that pulsed with gentle light, and floors that chimed softly beneath his boots. Marcus had studied everything available about Veltharian culture during his journey, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of walking through a palace that breathed. Throne room opened before him like the inside of a cathedral made from Aurora Borealis, and at its center sat Queen Mother Thesara upon a throne that grew from the floor like a flower of pure light. She was ancient by their standards, and her glow carried hints of deep violet and royal gold, and her eyes held the weight of centuries. "You are the human called Marcus Chun," she said, and her voice filled the chamber without effort. "You come seeking alliance against the darkness that spreads between the stars." "I do, Your Radiance," Marcus replied with the formal bow he had practiced 1,000 times. "Humanity offers friendship and partnership in the face of mutual threat." The Queen studied him for a long moment, and her light shifted through colors he could not name. "You are assigned a guide during your stay," she announced. "My 3rd daughter will attend to your needs and education in our ways." A figure stepped forward from beside the throne, and Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. Princess Sylvith stood 6.5 feet tall with skin that shimmered like moonlight on water and hair that flowed like strands of spun silver. Her light glowed a curious shade of pale green, and her eyes held genuine interest as she studied the small human before her. "I am Sylvith," she said, and her voice carried warmth that surprised him. "I have studied your species from afar and find you fascinating. The honor is mine." "Princess," Marcus managed to say without his voice cracking. Over the following weeks, Sylvith became his constant companion and teacher, and slowly something like friendship began to grow between them. She showed him the crystal gardens where plants grew in mathematical spirals, and the meditation chambers where Veltharians communed with the harmonic frequencies of their world. Marcus, in turn, shared stories of Earth and its chaotic beauty, and its people who lived such brief lives, yet burned so brightly. "Your kind lives only 200 years at most," Sylvith said one evening as they walked through a corridor of singing crystals. "How do you bear it?" "We do not think about the ending," Marcus replied. "We think about what we can do with the time we have, and we try to make it matter." Light shifted to a shade of soft pink that he had learned meant she was touched by something that is beautiful and terrifying, she admitted. The cultural exchange ceremony came on the 30th day of his visit, and Marcus stood in a chamber filled with representatives from across the Queen, the Veltharians wished to add human genetic material to their archives, and this was considered a great honor and a sign of respect between species. Marcus allowed them to draw his blood and watched as they placed it in a crystalline container that hummed with protective energy. Human DNA is remarkably adaptive, the head archivist announced to the assembled crowd. It shows an unusual capacity for integration with foreign genetic material. Sylvie stood nearby and observed with her characteristic curiosity, and her light glowed its usual pale green. Of intellectual interest, then the unthinkable happened. A young archivist stumbled, and the container slipped from their hands and shattered against the floor, and droplets of blood scattered across the polished surface. Alvave moved instinctively to help, and her hand touched the genetic material before anyone could stop her. For a moment, nothing happened, and then her light began to change. Pale green shifted and swirled and transformed into a deep, unmistakable violet that every Veltharian in the room recognized instantly. It was the color of conception. Gasps echoed through the chamber, and the archivist who had dropped the container collapsed in terror, and Sylvie stared at her own glowing hands with an expression of absolute shock. Impossible. Someone whispered, "The human has contaminated the princess." Another voice cried. Marcus did not understand what was happening, but he understood the fear and anger spreading through the room like wildfire. He understood when the great doors of the chamber slammed shut behind him with a sound like thunder. He understood when the guards surrounded him with their crystal blades drawn. He understood when Queen Mother Velara rose from her observation throne, and her light burned an angry crimson that filled the entire room with the color of blood and fury. "What have you done to my daughter, human?" she demanded, and her voice shook the walls themselves. Marcus looked at Sylvie and saw her violet glow, and finally understood the terrible truth. He had done something that should have been impossible. He had impregnated an alien princess with a single accidental touch, and now he stood sealed in a room full of beings who wanted him dead, with no way out and no idea how to survive what came next. The queen's crimson light grew brighter, and the guards stepped closer, and Marcus realized that all his diplomatic training had never prepared him for this moment. He was about to die very far from home. The crystal blades caught the light of the queen's fury and scattered crimson reflections across the walls like splashes of frozen blood. Marcus stood perfectly still in the center of the circle of guards and felt his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped animal. Sylvie had been taken away by medical attendants, and her violet glow had disappeared through a side passage and left him alone to face the consequences of something he did not understand. "You have committed crimes beyond imagination," Queen Mother Velara declared, and her voice crashed through the chamber like waves against stone. "You have contaminated royal bloodline and violated sacred reproductive protocols and corrupted my daughter's vessel." The assembled Veltharians murmured their agreement, and their lights shifted to shades of angry orange and hostile red. "The punishment for such crimes is dissolution," the queen continued. "Your molecular structure will be broken down over 3 days, and your atoms scattered across the void between stars." Marcus felt cold terror grip his spine, but something else stirred within him as well. He had not survived 15 years of human politics and 3 interstellar wars by surrendering to fear. "Your radiance," he said, and was surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "I request the right to speak." The queen's crimson glow flickered with surprise, and the chamber fell silent. No condemned being had ever made such a request in the 1,000 years of her reign. "You dare ask for words when your actions speak so loudly?" she demanded. "I dare because I do not understand my crime," Marcus replied. "And justice that punishes without understanding is not justice at all." Whispers spread through the crowd, and some of the hostile lights shifted to curious yellows. The queen studied him with ancient eyes that had seen empires rise and fall across the centuries. "Explain yourself." "Human." "I touched nothing inappropriate," Marcus said. I made no advances toward the princess, and I had no knowledge that such contact could result in what has happened. He took a deep breath and continued speaking. Among my people, we have a principle that intent matters, and that accidents are not crimes, and that punishment should fit both the action and the understanding behind it. Your people's principles do not apply here. The queen responded. Then teach me yours, Marcus said. Give me access to your laws so I might understand what I have done and prepare a proper defense. The queen's light shifted through several colors that Marcus could not interpret. You wish to study our legal codes, she said slowly. I wish to understand, Marcus replied. Is that not what your daughter taught me your people value above all things? The mention of Sylvith sent a ripple through the queen's glow, and for just a moment the crimson softened. You have one rotation of our world, she declared. 18 of your hours to study our laws and prepare whatever defense you think might save you. Guards escorted Marcus to a small chamber filled with crystalline tablets that contained the entire legal history of the Veltharian. Queen Nami did not sleep during those 18 hours. Instead, he read and studied and searched for anything that might keep him alive long enough to figure out what had really happened. Meanwhile, in the medical spire high above the palace, Sylvith lay upon a bed of soft light while physicians examined her with instruments that hummed and chimed. This should not be possible, the chief physician murmured as she studied the readings. Veltharian reproduction requires months of preparation and genetic compatibility testing and ritual bonding ceremonies. Yet here we are, Sylvith whispered, and her violet glow pulsed. With the life growing within her, the embryo is developing at an unprecedented rate. Another physician reported. It carries genetic markers from both species in a configuration we have never seen. The chief physician leaned closer to examine the data, and her light flickered with something that looked almost like wonder. The hybrid shows vitality levels that exceed normal Veltharian development by 300%, she said. Whatever this human's genetic material has done, it has created something remarkable. She prepared her report for the queen and included every detail of their findings. But she hesitated before including the final observation. The hybrid embryo showed signs of something that had not been seen in Veltharian offspring for over 1,000 years. Adaptive genetic markers that could modify themselves in response to environmental challenges. The ancient texts called it the gift of change, and it had allowed their ancestors to spread across the stars before their species had become stable and stagnant and slowly dying. When Queen Nasara received the report, her crimson glow flickered and shifted, and for the first time in centuries, she felt an emotion she barely recognized, fear wrapped in the thin disguise of hope. In his study chamber, Marcus discovered something that made him sit up straight and read the passage 3 more times to make certain he understood correctly. Veltharian sacred codex contained laws written during the earliest days of their civilization, when reproduction was rare and random, and every conception was considered a miracle. One law in particular caught his attention: the right of unexpected blessing stated that any conception, regardless of circumstance, was a gift from the cosmos, and that the one who provided such a gift should be honored rather than punished. The law had not been used in 10,000 years, but Marcus noticed something crucial: it had never been repealed. He began preparing his defense with new energy and purpose. The hours passed and dawn approached, and Marcus walked into the tribunal of light with knowledge that the queen did not expect him to possess representatives from across the queendom had arrived to witness the trial, and the chamber pulsed with hundreds of different colored glows. But Marcus felt something strange as he entered. Felt hope, and hope was the most dangerous weapon humanity had ever wielded. The tribunal of light assembled in the grand chamber that morning with more witnesses than any trial in living memory. Queen Mother Velara sat upon her throne with her 12 senior advisors arranged in a semicircle. Behind her, and their combined glow illuminated the room like a small sun. Representatives from 30 star systems had traveled through faster than light. Transit to witness this unprecedented event a human stood accused of impregnating a Veltharian princess through accidental contact. And the entire queendom held its breath. Marcus walked to the center of the chamber and stood in the circle of judgment where so many had stood before him. Most had not walked out again. The accused will hear the charges, the chief advisor announced in a voice like ringing bells. Marcus Chun of Earth, you are charged with genetic contamination of royal bloodline and violation of sacred reproductive protocols and corruption of a princess's vessel. How do you answer these charges? Queen Nasara demanded. Marcus looked up at the ancient queen and felt the weight of her centuries pressing down upon him. But he also felt something else. He felt ready. Your radiance. He began. I acknowledge that Princess Sylvith now carries a child that contains my genetic material. Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. However, Marcus continued, I challenge the accusation that I have committed any crime under Veltharian law. The queen's glow shifted to dangerous orange. You dare deny what you have done. I deny nothing, Marcus said. But I invoke the right of unexpected blessing as written in the sacred codex of your people. Silence crashed through the chamber like a physical force. The advisors exchanged shocked glances and their lights flickered through confused colors. That law has not been invoked in 10,000 years. The chief advisor stammered, yet it remains part of your legal code. Marcus replied, I have studied the records and found no document repealing or modifying this ancient statute. He recited the law from memory. The right of unexpected blessing states that any conception, regardless of circumstance, is considered a gift from the cosmos, and that the one who provides such a gift shall be honored, not punished. The queen's glow burned brighter, and her voice carried dangerous undertones. That law was written for our own species, she declared. It was never intended to apply to outsiders. Was it not? Marcus asked. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small data crystal. I also found the Treaty of First Contact signed by your Radiance 15 years ago when humanity first established diplomatic relations with the queendom. Queen's glow flickered with uncertainty. Article 7 of that treaty states that humans shall be granted all rights and recognitions afforded to sentient species of equivalent social development. Marcus continued, your own legal scholars classified humanity as equivalent to Veltharians. In their official assessment, he held up the crystal for all to see. This means that any law applicable to Veltharians must also apply to humans, and that includes the right of unexpected blessing. The chamber erupted into chaos. Advisors shouted at each other, and representatives argued in languages Marcus could not understand, and the rainbow of light swirled like a violent storm. Queen Nasara raised her hand, and the room fell silent. Her glow had shifted to something complex and unreadable as she studied the small human who had turned her own laws against her. You have studied our ways well, she admitted. Your daughter taught me that understanding is the highest virtue. Marcus replied, I merely followed her wisdom. The queen considered her options and found them all unsatisfying. She could not execute Marcus without violating the ancient law he had invoked. She could not release him without appearing weak before the entire queendom. She could not ignore the situation because the hybrid child grew stronger with every passing hour. Finally she spoke, and her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The law protects you from execution, she declared, but it does not free you from responsibility. Marcus felt his heart quicken as he waited for her judgment. You will remain on Velthara, the queen announced. You will serve as guardian to Princess Sylvith throughout her pregnancy, and you will be responsible for both her welfare and the welfare of the child she carries. Her glow brightened to blinding intensity. If any harm comes to either of them through your negligence or action, then your life is forfeit, and no ancient law will save you. Marcus bowed low and accepted the terms. I understand and accept this responsibility. Your radiance, the great doors of the chamber, unsealed with a sound like breaking chains. Marcus was no longer a prisoner awaiting execution. He was something far more complicated. He was guardian to an alien princess who carried his child. He was responsible for a life that had never existed before in all the history of the galaxy. And as he walked through those open doors, he saw Sylvie waiting in the corridor beyond. Her violet glow pulsed with the life growing within her, and her mercury eyes held emotions he could not read. You survived, she said softly. I survived, he agreed. And now it seems we are bound together by your mother's decree. Sylvie's light shifted to that curious shade of pink he had seen before. There are worse fates, she said. Marcus smiled despite everything that had happened and everything that lay ahead. Yes, he agreed. I suppose there are. They walked together through the singing corridors of the palace, and neither spoke of the future they now shared, but both of them knew that nothing would ever be the same. The galaxy had changed in that tribunal chamber, and humanity had taken another step toward the stars. 3 months passed on Velara, and Marcus watched as the impossible became real. Sylvie's pregnancy advanced rapidly, and her belly swelled with life that should not exist, and her violet glow grew brighter with each passing week. The physicians marveled at the readings, and the politicians argued about implications, and the entire queendom divided into factions over what the hybrid child meant for their future. Marcus spent his days at Sylvie's side and learned more about her people than any human had ever known. He discovered that she loved poetry written in harmonic frequencies that made the air itself vibrate with meaning. He learned that she had always felt different from her sisters and had always wondered if there was more to existence than the rigid traditions of the court. She, in turn, learned about humanity's chaotic history and their endless wars and their stubborn refusal to accept limits. Your species should have destroyed itself a dozen times, she said one evening as they sat in the crystal garden watching the twin suns set. Probably, Marcus agreed, but we never did. Why not? Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. Because there was always someone who refused to give up, he said. Someone who looked at impossible odds and decided to try anyway. Sylvie's light shifted to that pink shade that appeared more and more often when they talked. You are a strange species, she murmured. We prefer the term adaptable, Marcus replied with a smile. Their bond deepened through shared meals and long conversations and quiet moments watching the crystal towers glow beneath alien stars. Neither spoke of what grew between them, but both felt it like warmth spreading through cold space outside their peaceful bubble. The queendom fractured into opposing camps. Conservative factions demanded that the hybrid be destroyed and the human executed regardless of ancient laws. They saw the child as an abomination and a threat to the purity of Valtharian bloodlines. Progressive factions saw something different. They saw hope. The truth that none wished to speak aloud was that the Valtharian species was dying. Their reproduction rates had declined steadily for centuries, and artificial breeding programs produced fewer children each generation. The genetic vitality that had once allowed them to conquer 40 star systems had faded into comfortable stagnation. The hybrid child represented change, and change terrified. The old guard, while inspiring the young queen Velara, watched the chaos spread through her domain and felt the weight of impossible choices. pressing down upon her ancient shoulders. Then the swarm arrived. Scout ships detected the first wave entering Velfarian space on a morning when the crystal towers sang with unusual intensity. The insectoid horrors had sensed the political chaos and smelled weakness and came to feed Marcus. Received the news while sitting with Sylveth in her chambers, and felt his blood run cold. How many ships? He demanded of the messenger. 300 in the vanguard. The young Veltharian replied, more following behind. Earth's fleet was months away and could not arrive in time. Veltharian defense force was strong but had not fought a real war in generations. Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. I want to fight. He announced. Sylvath's glow flickered with alarm. You cannot be serious, she said. You are not a pilot, and you do not know our ships, and you will be killed. I spent 12 years in Earth's military before becoming a diplomat. Marcus replied, I have fought in 3 wars and survived battles that should have killed me. He turned to face her, and his eyes held determination that burned like fire. Your people need every fighter they can get, and I will not sit safely while others die too. Protect me. He went before Queen Thesara and made his request. The ancient queen studied him with eyes that had seen 10,000 years of history. You wish to fight for a people who wanted you dead mere months ago, she observed. I wish to fight for the world where my child will be born, Marcus replied, and for the woman who carries that child. The queen's glow shifted through colors too complex to name. She saw an opportunity to be rid of this troublesome human in a way that would appear honorable, but she also saw something else. She saw courage that reminded her of ancient stories about what her own species had once been. Permission granted, she declared. You will lead a squadron against the swarm vanguard. Marcus bowed and prepared to leave, but paused at the door. If I do not return, he said, tell Sylveth that these months with her have been the best of my life. The queen said nothing, but her glow softened just slightly. Sylveth waited for Marcus in the hangar where crystal fighters stood ready for battle. Her violet glow pulsed rapidly with the stress of the moment, and her hands trembled as she reached for him. You cannot do this, she whispered. I have to, Marcus replied. It is what humans do. She pulled him close and pressed her forehead against his in the Veltharian gesture of deepest connection. Then come back to me, she said. Come back to us. Marcus climbed into the cockpit of an alien fighter and felt the ship hum to life around him. The controls were strange, but the principle was the same as any combat craft he had ever flown. Pointed enemy and pulled trigger. The squadron launched into the crystal sky, and Marcus led them toward the darkness between stars where the swarm waited behind him. Sylveth watched until the ships vanished from sight. Her light shifted to a color that no one in the court had ever seen before. The humans had a word for it. They called it love, and she understood now why they considered it worth dying for. The Battle of the Crystalline Reaches would become legend among both species. 300 swarm ships darkened the stars like a cloud of hungry locusts, and their chittering communications filled every frequency with the sound of endless hunger. Marcus led his squadron of 12 Eltharian fighters into that darkness and felt no fear. He had been afraid before, when he faced the tribunal, and when he first touched alien soil, and when he realized he had fathered an impossible child. But fear had become something else now. Fear had become fuel. The Veltharian pilots flew in perfect geometric formations, just as their doctrine prescribed, and their elegant maneuvers followed mathematical principles developed over millennia. Marcus watched them for exactly 30 seconds before he broke away and dove straight into the heart of the swarm formation. Human, what are you doing? His squadron commander demanded over the communication channel. Winning, Marcus replied. He flew like no Veltharian had ever flown. He spun and rolled and changed direction in ways that made no tactical sense, and the swarm ships could not predict his movements because there was nothing to predict. He was chaos given wings. Marcus used an asteroid fragment as a weapon and nudged it with his engines until it crashed into a cluster of enemy ships. He broadcast human music at frequencies that disrupted swarm hive mind communications and watched as their coordinated attacks dissolved into confusion. He rammed a wounded swarm fighter with his own ship and survived by ejecting at the last moment and being recovered by a passing friendly vessel. The Veltharian pilots watched in horror and fascination as this tiny human broke every rule they had ever learned. Then something remarkable happened. They started learning. A young pilot named Felvarus imitated Marcus and dove into an enemy formation. With unpredictable movements, an experienced commander ordered his ships to scatter and attack from random angles instead of maintain formation. The elegant mathematical precision of Veltharian combat doctrine merged with human chaos and created something new, something devastating. The swarm had fought Veltharians before and had learned to predict their patterns. They had never faced anything like this ship. After ship fell to attacks that came from unexpected angles at unexpected times in unexpected ways. The vanguard that should have swept aside all resistance found itself surrounded by enemies who refused to behave properly. When the survivors of the swarm force finally retreated into faster-than-light escape, it marked the first time in recorded galactic history that they had fled from battle. Marcus drifted in the wreckage of his third borrowed ship and smiled through cracked lips as he watched them go. The rescue vessel found him barely alive with 17 broken bones and internal bleeding that should have killed him. They rushed him back to Velara, where human doctors worked alongside Veltharian physicians in a desperate effort to save the hero of the crystalline reaches. During the surgery, the physicians discovered something extraordinary. Marcus's genetic structure had begun changing. Months of exposure to Veltharian atmosphere and medicine and bonding with Sylveth had triggered something in his adaptive human DNA. His cells were incorporating trace elements of Veltharian biology without losing their human nature. He was becoming more than he had been, not less human, but more human. Adaptability was not just psychological as the Veltharians had assumed. It was written into the very code of their existence. Marcus woke 3 days later to find Sylvie sitting beside his bed with tears of liquid silver running down her luminescent cheeks. "You came back," she whispered. "I promised," he replied weakly. "Our daughter was born while you slept," Sylvie said, and her violet glow pulsed with joy and exhaustion. She placed a small bundle in his arms, and Marcus looked down at the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The child had her mother's glowing skin that shifted through colors. Like Aurora Borealis, she had her father's dark eyes that held depths of stubborn determination, and she glowed in colors that should not exist. Human emotions made visible in alien light. Happiness was golden sunshine, and curiosity was emerald green, and love was a shade of pink that made Marcus's heart ache with its beauty. Queen Mother the Sara came to see her great-granddaughter on the evening of the child's first day. She stood beside the bed where Marcus held the infant, and Sylvie rested from the birth, and her ancient eyes studied the impossible child. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she did something that no queen had done in 10,000 years of recorded history. She bowed not to Marcus or to Sylvie, but to the future cradled in their arms. "She will be named in both traditions," the queen announced. "Lila, meaning hope in the human tongue, and Velthasara, meaning bearer of new light in ours." The alliance between humanity and the Veltharian queendom was sealed in that moment, not by treaties or diplomatic agreements, but by blood and love and the small miracle sleeping peacefully in her father's arms. In the years that followed, more humans came to Velthara and more Veltharians traveled to Earth. Some of them fell in love across the boundaries of species, just as days. Marcus and Sylvie had the hybrid children appeared slowly at first, and then in greater numbers. They called themselves the Bridge Generation because they connected two peoples who had once been strangers. They carried their mother's glow and their father's adaptability, and they saw the universe in ways neither parent species could imagine alone when the swarm returned in force. A decade later, with a fleet of 10,000 ships, they expected to find the same enemies they had faced before. Instead, they found a new people, humans who glowed with alien light and fought with the chaos of their ancestors, Valthorians, who adapted and improvised and refused to accept defeat, hybrids, who combined the best of both worlds in bodies built for war and minds shaped for peace. The second battle of the crystalline reaches lasted 3 days and ended with the complete destruction of the swarm invasion force. Marcus watched the final enemy ship fall from the command deck of the joint fleet flagships. Sylvie stood beside him with their daughter Lila, now 10 years old, perched on her shoulders. Lila glowed bright gold with triumph as she watched the stars clear of enemies. "Did we win, Father?" she asked. Marcus smiled and put his arm around his wife and daughter and felt the warmth of two species flowing through his family. "We all won," he said. The galaxy had learned what Queen Desara finally understood on the day she bowed. Before an infant, humanity did not simply survive, humanity transformed everything it touched, and when they combined that gift with the ancient wisdom of the Valtharians, they created something that neither species could have achieved alone. They created a future worth fighting for, and somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, the remaining swarm learned a new emotion. They learned to affirm the Valtharians with their elegant ships, not the humans with their chaotic determination, but the children of both who glowed with impossible light and fought with unstoppable fury. The bridge generation had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same.